They humiliated him, unaware he was the secret owner of their $800 million company. The morning sun was barely rising over Crestview City when Arlen Trace stepped off the old bus, clutching a worn-out backpack that looked like it had survived a small war. His shoes were dusty, his shirt faded, and the faint smell of engine grease still lingered on his hands. No one who saw him would have guessed that the man standing under the glowing daylight was the hidden owner of an $800 million tech manufacturing company. No one could have imagined that behind those tired eyes was a story of loss, resilience, and a quiet determination to understand the empire he had secretly inherited. But as he walked toward the towering glass building of Novatron Industries, he didn't look like a man who owned anything. He looked like a man applying for a job he wasn't sure he'd get. And that was exactly what he wanted. Because today, he wasn't arriving as an owner. He was arriving as a mechanic seeking a minimum wage position into a company whose senior staff had no idea who he truly was. Before we continue, if stories about kindness, second chances, and emotional journeys inspire you, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Touch of Kindness Stories. It really helps us bring more heart-touching stories to wonderful viewers like you. Arlen walked through the lobby, observing the giant screens that displayed the company's achievements and innovation awards. Everything glittered: product displays, marble floors, polished counters. It all looked so perfect, so powerful, but Arlen had learned long ago that not everything shiny was kind. After the sudden death of his estranged father, Magnus Trace, founder and CEO, Arlen had inherited everything. But rather than announcing himself, he had quietly stepped into the shadows, wanting to understand the culture of the company that had consumed his father's life and kept him far from Arlen during his childhood. He wanted to see how people were treated at the bottom, where no cameras flashed and no awards were given. So he applied for the lowest job available: maintenance technician assistant. Inside the HR office, he felt people's eyes skim over him with the quick, dismissive evaluation reserved for those who looked poor. The hiring officer barely made eye contact. She glanced at his resume, saw the small jobs, the years in repair shops, the technical certifications, and gave him a nod that felt more like a shrug. He was hired within 5 minutes, not because they saw potential, but because they didn't care enough to look deeper. Arlen wasn't surprised. That was why he was here. His first day was drenched in sunlight that poured through the high windows as he was assigned to follow a senior floor supervisor, Jarek Shaw. Jarek was the kind of man who wore his arrogance like expensive cologne. The moment he saw Arlen's faded clothes and tired appearance, annoyance flickered in his eyes. Jarek treated him like an inconvenience rather than a person. During the morning shift, he barked orders at him, mocked the way he held a wrench, and loudly questioned how someone like him was even hired. Other workers followed Jarek's lead, laughing behind Arlen's back, whispering things they assumed he couldn't hear. They dismissed him because they saw someone small, someone forgettable, someone who didn't belong in such a gleaming world. Yet Arlen did not react. He kept his gaze steady, his hands steady, his heart steady. He repaired machines with precision, solved problems faster than expected, and offered help to co-workers without hesitation. And though his silence infuriated those who expected him to snap, he never did. For him, this was not just a job. It was a mirror to see the truth of the empire he was about to take responsibility for. The days passed with the same rhythm: bright mornings, relentless schedules, sharp insults. The harsh fluorescent lights reflected off metal parts that felt colder than the people who handled them. But there were exceptions. One person stood out: Maeva Collins, a soft-spoken quality inspector with calm eyes and quiet strength. Where others sneered at Arlen, she smiled. Where others gave orders, she offered help. She noticed the way he fixed complex issues that usually required senior engineers. She also noticed how Jarek humiliated him publicly, treating him as less than human. Sometimes Maeva would leave extra water bottles at his workstation or show him spots in the cafeteria where the light fell warmly through the windows and the noise was less overwhelming. Arlen appreciated her kindness more than she could ever guess. But he kept his identity hidden, even from her. Not yet. Not until he understood everything. One afternoon, under the bright midday sun that spilled through the glass ceiling of the production bay, Arlen was called to repair a machine that had unexpectedly malfunctioned. It was holding up a critical shipment worth millions. Jarek stood there yelling at workers while corporate executives hovered nervously nearby. When Arlen arrived, Jarek rolled his eyes dramatically, saying loud enough for everyone to hear that the poor stray dog had finally arrived. Workers laughed. Executives smirked. Arlen knelt beside the machine, ignoring the noise, and within minutes he identified the real cause: a wiring fault deep within the system. He fixed it with the kind of expertise that left the supervisor speechless. When the machine roared back to life and the whole assembly line resumed, the executives muttered something about luck and walked away. Jarek didn't thank him. Instead, he blamed him for not fixing it sooner, using every opportunity to insult him further. The day finally came when Arlen witnessed something that hardened his resolve. He saw Maeva being scolded publicly by Jarek for a mistake she didn't make. He watched her eyes lower, her voice quiet, her hands tremble. Maeva was good, better than good. but she was being targeted simply because she refused to mistreat others. Something in Arlen burned. For the first time since he stepped into Novatron, he felt anger, not for himself, but for the people who suffered under leaders who never learned compassion. That evening, when the sky outside glowed with the warm orange of sunset, Arlen made a decision. The next day, everything would change. When morning came, it came brightly, sun rays cutting through the glass facade as the company prepared for the quarterly review meeting. Executives, managers, and top supervisors gathered in the auditorium, their badges gleaming. They spoke in low, confident voices about numbers, projections, and future strategies. Jarek bragged loudly about his department, acting like a king among peasants. One noticed Arlen slip in through a side door. Not in his faded clothes, not in his quiet steps. But all of that was about to shift. As the corporate board took their seats, the chairman, an elderly gentleman named Victor Halden, tapped the microphone and announced that the company's transitional owner had arrived. Gasps filled the room. Whispers erupted. People straightened their ties and adjusted their jackets. Everyone looked around, expecting a wealthy young magnate with a luxury suit and polished shoes. Instead, Arlen Trace stepped into the light that a wave of confusion swept through the room. People exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Is that the maintenance guy?" Jarek burst into laughter at first, until he saw Victor bow his head respectfully toward Arlen. Then everything turned very still. Arlen walked up to the stage with a calm dignity that the company had failed to see in him. Under the bright daytime lights of the auditorium, he looked different, not because his clothes had changed, but because the truth had. Victor introduced him as the sole inheritor of the Trace family estate and the rightful owner of Novatron Industries. Silence fell so sharply it felt like the air had frozen. Arlen began to speak, not with vengeance, not with arrogance, but with a steady voice nearly trembling with emotion. He talked about the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the technicians who kept the company alive, the employees who deserved respect but rarely received it. He described his decision to work undercover, to understand the heart of the company his father built. And then he looked directly at Jarek, whose face had drained of color. Without raising his voice, Arlen spoke about the humiliation he endured, the way some employees treated him, and how leadership wasn't about authority. It was about humanity. Everyone in the auditorium felt the weight of his words under the morning light that lit his face with unwavering truth. He did not fire Jarek immediately. Instead, he suspended him pending full investigation for misconduct. That was more powerful than anger. It was justice handled with grace. Arlen then announced sweeping changes. Employee wellness programs, fair evaluations, leadership training with a focus on empathy, opportunities for those who had been overlooked, and above all, a culture of respect. People looked at him not as a mechanic now, but as a leader they wished they'd known sooner. After the meeting, Mava approached him, unable to hide her shock. Arlen apologized, not for hiding who he was, but for watching her suffer. She smiled softly and told him that kindness doesn't need to know someone's status to be real. That moment stayed with him forever. The days that followed were bright. Sunlit hallways filled with calmer conversations, supervisors learning humility, workers standing taller. Arlen moved into his rightful office, but never lost the simplicity of his old habits. He still visited the maintenance department,